Hello, B-Sides. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Peter Collins and Elisa Guerrant. They're going to be speaking.
All right. Cool. All right, so yeah, welcome to our talk titled Heard You Liked Access, so we built Access to manage your access for access. It was, that's hard to do. It's mostly, we're going to be talking about our path to building an internal new access control system at Discord for employees. So let's get started with some introductions. I'm Peter Collins, Senior Staff Security Engineer at Discord. I work on cloud security and identity and access management on the platform security team. My focus is on writing software to paved paths that make the secure way the easy way. I strive as a senior staff security engineer to build a security culture that is transparent, scalable, empathetic, and positive. And hopefully you'll see how we integrate that security culture in our talk today.
I'm Elisa. I'm also a security engineer at Discord. I work with Peter on the platform engineering team, security engineering team. So far, I've mostly worked on malware prevention and access management. And my goals through work are just to help make security intuitive and computers and applications safer for users. So as just like a quick overview of our talk, we're going to discuss kind of our path to deciding to build a new access control system, go over some of the design that went into it, and then highlight a lot of the main features, and then discuss the tech stack and the impact. So for starters, why are access controls needed in the first place? So according to Verizon's 2023 Data Breach Investigations Report, 74% of all breaches involve the human element. Within that, privilege misuse and stolen user credentials are two of the primary threats. As part of business and security maturity, this is something that we need to address and set up plans and policies to control access to sensitive data and resources. One way of doing this is by making sure that users only have access to the specific data, resources, and applications that they need to complete a required task.
Cool. So now that we've talked a little bit about why internal access controls are necessary, let's talk about some of the goals we had for internal access control at Discord. What are our really guiding principles? So the first goal we had is we want this system to be intuitive. So what do we mean by that? We want it to be easy to use and understandable so that we can show current and historical permissions and allow for people to easily request additional access. We want this system to be usable by all employees, not just a technical bunch like IT or security engineering or generally engineering. So because of that, we want a web user interface that people can easily look up and intuitively find what they need with access control permissions, and not necessarily use a command line utility or requiring pull requests via some GitOps flow. The next goal we had for our internal access control system was we want it to be transparent and discoverable. Essentially, we believe that employees solving their own permissions issues safely increases business velocity and security. In other words, we believe unblocking people to do their jobs quickly enables the business to move faster. So let's break that down a little bit, what we mean by transparent and discoverable. So instead of entirely relying on a centralized team like IT or security to solve certain questions, individual employees can now answer for themselves. What permissions do I currently have? What permissions does my teammate have that I don't? Did I recently lose access to something, and what was it? And how do I request additional access? And not just for individual employees, we want to solve these similar questions for team leads and managers. So, such as how do I give access to a new team member, and how do I give temporary access to an individual for a cross-functional effort on my team temporarily? Next goal we had is we want this system to be centralized. We want a one-stop shop to replace all out-of-band access request mechanisms, whether they were historically IT help desk requests or requests in various help chat channels or random emails. All of these different mechanisms are really hard to audit later and determine why somebody was granted access to something, and also determine exactly determine if a user or a team actually needs that access. We also wanted this system to integrate well with our identity provider for single sign-on, and in our case, our identity provider is Okta. We want this intuitively to work with Okta as a way that people can both when they want to log into a single application, they go to Okta, and if they need to be authorized for that application, they go to this one-stop shop. The next thing with centralization here is we want it to become more useful with increased usage, and essentially what this means is network effects. As people use this functionality more and more, they will go to it in the future, and it'll be a self-enforcing utility for that. The last goal we had for the system is we want it to be secure. So what do we mean by security? We want it to be least privilege and audible. So in terms of least privilege, we want to be able to provide a top-level role-based access control mechanism. And in other words, we want to provide common workflows with a standard set of permissions. And we'll talk a little bit more on what this means in a bit. But we also want to be able to enforce time-bounded expiring access to be able to right-size permissions so that unused permissions will be automatically removed later on. As we want this to be auditable, we want to be able to audit both current and historical permissions to easily determine if permissions are recently lost, if they're expiring soon, and that sort of thing. And then also, Discord, like many businesses and companies out there, have compliance goals that we want to achieve. And so we want the system to be able to achieve and exceed those compliance objectives to make our auditors happy.
So as Peter mentioned, we're interested in role-based access control. So just as a quick overview of what that is, role-based access control is the idea that permissions are managed based on users with shared job functions, as opposed to team or any other criteria. This makes it a lot more clear why someone has access to certain resources. It also makes it so ramping up on a new project, onboarding, team transfers, anything like that is much easier. So as just a quick example of this, we have a very simplified team with a manager, a software engineer, and a data scientist. And on the far right, we have a set of resources like email, a Google group for managers, GitHub, engineering documentation, stuff like that. So in the middle, we have it set up for different job functions. So all employees should have access to email, whereas managers should have access to the manager Google group, and engineers should have access to GitHub and engineering documentation. So as an example, the manager is given the role all employees and manager, which gives the manager access to the appropriate resources, versus the engineer is given access to all employees and engineering, which does the same thing without granting access to too many things. So Peter also mentioned that we're interested in top-level RBAC. A lot of services have the idea of roles integrated, but those don't propagate across services. So we wanted to be able to do it at the level of the identity provider so that we can set up roles and manage them in one place, and then they'll be used everywhere. This can be achieved generically with nested groups and group roles, but that can complicate group management a lot. It also decreases transparency, because if you have a nested group and a nested group and a nested group, you don't really know who's in it anymore, and it's really hard to manage in that way.
Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the guiding principles and the goals we had for this system, why did we decide to build a new tool instead of buy existing one or use some open source option? So we took a look at the field, and we did find quite a few SaaS and open source solutions that were available. But we found some deficiencies and actually some boxes they did check for us. So first off, some were compatible and well integrated with Okta, our identity provider. And this is pretty important because we weren't planning to move between identity providers. Some were compatible with other services and identity providers out there like LDAP or other directory services, such as Entra ID or something like that. But we weren't interested in those. Most were compatible with enterprise chat solutions. I'm not going to name any names, but we don't really use them at Discord. We use Discord for Discord to make Discord, so they weren't really options for us. But a lot of them did allow custom integration, so we could have made it work for those at least. The next one is few did really provide a view for employees to solve their own access issues. They really didn't provide a way beyond administrator panel to see what permissions do I currently have as a random employee at this company. Along those lines, few really did support role-based access control at a top-level feature, which meant a lot of manual managing of users into individual groups for different applications, and there was no way to send role-based access control at the top level with our identity provider in a way that was intuitive. A lot of them actually surprisingly did support some form of time-bounded expiring access, which most identity providers don't provide this internally, but a lot of these out-of-band tools did actually support that. So it's green for that reason. Really, good job on that part, which is great. However, on the other side, few supported delegating administration of groups in an opinionated way that was intuitive for people to use. A lot of them were really focused on some sort of centralized IT or security team managing permissions and weren't able to delegate those permissions out easily to other team leads or app owners. And also some with that supported routing access requests to the delegated administrator, but a lot of them weren't done in an opinionated or standardized way that would have been intuitive to set up or made sense for regular employees. So why did we build it ourselves? Well, a lot of the options we found were compelling. None of them really checked all the goals that we were highly value, especially top-level RBAC, transparency and discoverability for individual employees. We really wanted to speed up the company by providing that transparency. An opinionated, standardized way to delegate administration and access request routing that would be intuitive for employees and team leads and managers to understand. And we did want some sort of integration with Discord for notifications, but we did think we could build that ourselves with many of these solutions.
So now that we've discussed our path to deciding to build a new tool, we're just going to get into some of the foundational features. So for starters, we have users. Users are employees of the company. Here you can see an example from Access, which is what we named the app. So on the far right, you can see who the user reports to, some details like their title, but more importantly, you can see what the user owns and what they're a member of. These are all going to be groups. So we have 3 types of groups in Access. The first type is like a vanilla standalone group. This is the initial group type that's used in a migration to use the Access app. It has a little bit less utility after the initial migration. The second type is role groups. So if you imagine that RBAC diagram from before, this is the central column. These are role groups can be members or owners of other groups, and they represent a job function. And so then the final group type is app groups. App groups are like kind of that mapping to the far right resource column of the RBAC diagram. They can be tied to certain permissions within an app. So apps are essentially just a set of role groups, or a set of app groups. Apps can be tied to any third-party SaaS application, first-party service, essentially anything Okta compatible, which means that you can manage a lot of things all in one place.
All right, so now that we've talked about some of the foundational elements of Access, let's talk about some of the unique features and how they accomplish our goal. So first up, we have direct user assignments versus role assignments. We've talked a little bit about role-based access control, but I want to go into a little bit more depth here. So essentially, you can both directly assign users or roles to a group in Access. By default, you can do it directly. So in this example, on the right, you have the Phoebe Discord character who is directly assigned to the group fun squad and gets the permissions of the group fun squad. Whereas via role-based access control, the group characters on the left, Wumpus and Clyde, are part of the role Discord characters. And so because they are members of the Discord characters role, they are automatically given membership to the group fun squad themselves. Use direct assignment when you're migrating to Access, when you first start out without any roles. But as you start using Access more and more role-based access control, the direct assignments hopefully will taper off in their usage. Next feature, hopefully relatively straightforward, access requests. We wanted to be able to provide employees a way to both request access to any group for a specific duration, whether they want to be an owner or a member, and then also provide a reason. The next feature is group and app ownership. So essentially, we want to be able to delegate owners who can then manage each group or app. What do we mean by manage? They can manage the membership or ownership of that group or application. They can manage the title or the name or the description of that application. But I think most importantly, they can approve or deny access requests. And this really is the main piece of it. They can lead to faster resolution times because we're not centralized on a single IT or security team approving these requests. And for security, this helps reduce the risk of confused deputies. So what is a confused deputy? Well, it's an administrator with little context about what permission grants when approving or denying an access request, which often leads to a lot of back and forth trying to determine if a user actually needs that permission or who that user is. And eventually, this fatigues the administrator, and they rubber stamp most access requests if they've seen them before or if they're a common thing, and they don't actually know the underlying permissions they're granting. So we want the opposite. We want an individual with the most context about a specific group. They should be able to decide who gets permission. And what is in this example, we want team leads to be able to approve role requests and service owners for application requests. The next feature, very straightforward, time-bounded access. We can grant access for a limited amount of time, and after that set amount of time, a user is automatically removed from a group. This is useful for periodic access reviews for compliance requirements. So let's say you have to review membership of a group every 90 days for certain sensitive groups at your company. Well, you can do that implicitly by setting the membership of that group to 90 days, and then the individual in that group can either request access additionally, or the owner can renew in a bulk fashion all the membership of those groups, or else implicitly that membership will be revoked. This also does reduce the likelihood of accumulating unused permissions. So as seen in this diagram below, on the left, without expiring access control in an access control system, you have over time an employee will gain permissions whether they get promoted or switch teams or are in a cross-functional effort temporarily. Whereas in a system with expiration, those unused permissions are automatically removed after 90 days or maybe a year, depending on what you set for the expiration of that role or other cross-functional effort. So they're really right-sized to their job as they work at that company.
So the next feature is what we call audit views. They'll show historical permissions for users, groups, or roles, and to help with our goal of transparency and discoverability, they're available for anyone in the company to be able to view. They're useful for troubleshooting historical changes to access and for record keeping and anything like that. So here's an example of a user audit view. In this example, the user is named Locke, and you can see that you can sort, you can filter, you can go through, but it displays all of this user's access history throughout the time that they were integrated into the app. You can see any sort of membership justification that was provided, you can see access duration, and you can see who added them and who removed them. The next feature is group and app tagging. So theoretically, this can just be used to label similar groups and just have a label on them. But more interestingly, I think, is that you can apply constraints to them. So these constraints can be an owner or membership time limit. They can enforce requiring justification for access. And for more sensitive groups, you can make it so that owners can't manage their own access. So here's an example of a tag page. So as you can see in the first section, you can see all the constraints that are currently applied. In this case, requiring membership justification and a 90-day membership time limit. And then below that, you can see all the apps and the groups that are tagged. So an important thing to note here is that any apps that are tagged, since apps are just collections of app groups, that tag will propagate down to all the app groups within the app. That said, individual groups can also be tagged, so in some cases, you might not want to tag every single app group within an app. You can just go through and tag them individually. You can also tag roles. So the next piece is expiring access and bulk renewal. So before we had this piece, you'd have to go through every individual group and user page and scroll through the list and try to figure out what's expiring. And that was just really inefficient. It caused a lot of people to lose access because they didn't know that anything was expiring to begin with. So we created a page that shows all of this all in one place across the company that anyone can view. It can also be filtered so that owners can see all the access for groups that they own, and individuals can see all of their own expiring access. For individuals, they can create a new access request directly from that page, just to try to ease the use of the app. So here's an example of an expiring access page for owners. So owners can go through, and it really highlights when a group is incorrectly owned, and then otherwise they can go through and filter and select which users that they'd like to renew access for, and then they can do that all at once. So here, an owner can go through and select all the access they want to renew in one place. And then if any constraints are applied to groups, like some sort of time limit or required reason, it'll be displayed and enforced here. The last feature we want to talk about is notifications. There's several types that we have implemented. And these examples are from Discord because we use Discord for everything. But the notification system is set up via plugin, so it will be made compatible with email or any other chat solution. So the first type will alert owners of access requests made to groups that they own. After a decision is made, the individual who requested access will be notified of the decision. And then we also have expiring access for owners and individuals. So owners will be notified when individuals or roles are losing access to groups they own, and individuals be notified of their own expiring access. So this notification system generally just helps with adoption of the app and avoids business disruptions due to lost access.
All right, so now that we've talked about a few of the features in Access, let's talk a little bit about how it works under the hood. So yeah, we have, essentially it's a Python Flask app with a React TypeScript Material UI backend. It's a single page front-end app with a REST API and a relational database. In production, we use Postgres, and in development, we use SQLite. You could probably use a different database if you wanted, but that's what we chose. In Access, group changes are synced on demand and periodically with Okta. On demand for most actions, such as adding or removing a member from a group, but periodically for as a cron job for expiring access. So if a user lost access in the last 15 minutes, and we run this job every 15 minutes, we should remove that access from Okta. But we also run it periodically to sync the state from Access to Okta so that if there are any rate limits or API errors that we run across, they're automatically resolved and overwritten in case people, lost access or something like that. We did, as mentioned, we do have a notification system, a plugin system for custom integrations such as notifications. So we provide a templated interface so you can use any Python code that you want to write for talking to different chat providers or SMS or email. And then also we do provide a plugin interface that's new for conditionally approving or denying access requests automatically based on any Python logic you want. So you could call out to another service, or you could hard code a static group or role or something that you want to automatically approve or for a specific amount of time. And this whole system is packaged in a Docker container and can be deployed anywhere where Docker containers are deployed. We deploy ours on Kubernetes, but you could also use Docker Compose or something serverless. So we've been running Access internally at Discord for the past year, and what was really the impact for us? Well, it's been pretty successful. User access reviews take hours and not days. There's significantly less back and forth and cat herding via spreadsheets. Access requests are now centralized instead of a whole bunch of different out-of-band ways to communicate and request access from IT or from various engineering teams. It's now all streamlined through one system. And this has also led to less rubber stamping and confused deputy problems, because now access requests are routed to the most appropriate individuals, such as team leads for roles or application groups for service owners for application groups. We found that this helped us reduce highly privileged access permissions, because for sensitive critical groups, we were able to easily audit why people had access to those and then set a time limit if we didn't want standing access for those so that they could re-request in the future. Yeah, and that's how it helped us be more secure.
So this brings us kind of to the whole reason for having this talk. Besides just showing off what we've been working on, Access is open sourced. So here we include the links for the GitHub so you can see the repo. We have a server set up on Discord so you can submit feedback, ask questions, anything like that. And we also published a blog post a while back, and that features screen recordings, so you can also see the app in action a little bit. So thank you so much.
Let's do it. Let's do it on the back.
We'll talk from our speakers. We have Q&A taken through Slido. You can get to the Q&A question prompt at bsidessf.org/Q&A. I'm going to be reading off ones that have already been submitted. First question, how do you efficiently manage ownership of groups and apps within the company for all tool and org changes?
Yeah, so role-based access control is typically how we manage org changes. We can easily split or merge different roles together, but we did want this to be flexible, so we don't rely on setting permissions directly on the name of a role group. We set it on the app groups themselves, and so we try to orient around that for different org changes.
I think this slide's distracting.
Okay.
Next question, how do you handle apps that do not have native SAML or skin features available?
Yeah, so that was one thing we didn't really talk about too much in the talk. We do rely on Okta for syncing all group and member permissions to upstream applications. Access doesn't do that built in. So yeah, there is a gap there with SCIM support for most applications. A lot of the critical apps out there today support SCIM for syncing group membership, but that is one thing we're working on, is supporting it for future applications via contract negotiations or something like that, but also maybe building it in ourselves as a plug-in feature into Access. When features don't support SAML or OIDC, I mean, ideally it's not an SSO tax that we have to pay for, but that is typically a contract negotiation thing that we want for an enterprise solution that we're using at the company.
Next question from Tom. For the role assignment to a group, does the role map to an Okta entity, or is that entity in Access only?
Yeah, so all groups in Access are mapped to Okta. The idea of roles and app groups and everything is an abstraction that's kind of one level up within Access. And that helps, like, if you're in a role and you're added to a group, that all the members of the role will get added to the group. But yeah, everything maps to Okta groups.
All right. Next question from Gabe. Cool tool. The name Access makes it almost impossible to search for it by name. Are you considering any alternative names?
We definitely gotten that feedback before. Not this time, but.
All right. Next question from Frenchie. Do you accept PRs? And if yes, how extensively do they need to be tested?
Well, Frenchie's already given a PR, and yeah, we do accept PR. I mean, definitely hit us up in the Discord server if you want to chat about submitting any contributions. But Frenchie's PR is hard to test, so I don't know when we're going to merge it.
All right. Next question. Any plans to consider other attributes beyond roles for access approvals, group membership, or expirations? On-call status, device state, geolocation, etc.
I haven't really thought about that, sorry. But it's an open source project, it's very extensible, and we do plan to build more plugin interfaces for other extensibility as well as built-in features, so definitely open to it.
Is it feasible to extend it to support IDPs other than Okta?
I would say, yeah. Access is not it's not an identity provider. It is more of a UI for a group directory service. So there is actually a very easy way you could. The integration with Okta is actually just a single Python class, and you could rewrite that to be a different a group directory service if you wanted to, such as Entra ID or LDAP or something else. We do, if that is like a goal that somebody has, we could probably build that as a plugin interface so that it's easier to swap that in and out and not just use Okta.
Last question. Do you use a different security posture from this app when compared to other apps? Assuming the app is being breached, it would be super bad.
I might have to follow-up question on that one. We can talk in the back if you're here, but I don't know what exactly a security posture, the details of that, but it's fine. Sorry.
That's fair. All right, that's all the time we have for Q&A. Our speakers will be available upstairs in the mezzanine if you guys want to follow up with them. Please give them a round of applause for this amazing talk.